One bark split the rain that night, sharp, desperate, true. While the town of Bright Ridge drowned in silence, one German shepherd refused to look away. His ears twitched, his paws splashed through floodwater. He pulled at the leash, leading a weary rescuer to the doorstep no one was meant to find. Behind that door, a broken home, a child too quiet, and a secret loud enough to shake the town. He wasn't just a dog, he was the voice for the voiceless, the howl in the storm, the one who knew before anyone else someone was still in there. This is the story of a girl lost in the flood, a man haunted by duty, and the bark that brought the truth to light. Before we begin, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tap the bell so you won't miss the stories that break and mend the soul all in one breath. The sky above Bright Ridge, Texas, was a heavy slate of gray, bloated with clouds that hadn't stopped spilling rain for nearly 2 days. The streets no longer carried names. They were rivers now lined with debris, floating trash cans, and the occasional children's toy bobbing like silent memories. Rooftops had become islands. The few residents who hadn't evacuated in time were calling out from attic windows, waving frantically at rescue boats, their voices nearly drowned in the wind. It was chaos shaped like water. Sergeant Nathan Carter stood on the flooded corner of Oak Street just past Ridgeview Avenue, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead beneath his rescue helmet. He was soaked through fatigue's harness boots, but he barely noticed. A man of 38, he carried the fatigue of someone who had seen too many disasters but still cared enough to show up. Nathan had a square jaw, a quiet voice, and the posture of a former soldier who no longer cared about medals, only people. Before this, he had served 2 tours in Iraq, had once been promoted early for exceptional clarity under stress. But what shaped him more deeply wasn't combat. It was Hurricane Harvey when his younger brother, just 19, died, trapped in a flooded basement apartment. Nathan had joined the Texas National Guard's Rescue Division, not long after trying to save perhaps the lives that reminded him of the one he had lost. At his side was Max, a 4-year-old German shepherd with striking black and tan, fur-piercing amber eyes, and the kind of intelligence that made humans uncomfortable. Max had been trained as a K9 search and rescue dog since puppyhood. He was lean and muscular, his movements smooth and purposeful. A long, faint scar cut diagonally across his left hind leg, a relic of a kennel fire that had taken the rest of his litter. That trauma had never left him, though he rarely showed it. Max wasn't just obedient. He was perceptive, even intuitive. Some said he could sense despair. Nathan didn't argue. Max had once found a missing teenager in the woods, just by catching a shift in wind. Oak Street was almost cleared. Nathan's team had spent the last 40 hours helping evacuate houses marked in blue spray paint. Each house with an X indicated it had been searched and cleared. Most of the homes were older single-story wooden structures with sagging porches and rusted wind chimes. Oak Street in particular was low-lying. It was among the first to flood when the levee failed. Nathan's radio crackled. Command to all units, secondary levee breach predicted in 25. Finish sweep and pull out. I repeat, 25 minutes. He pressed his mic. Copy. Oak Street almost clear. Finishing last row. Max padded silently through the ankle-high water beside him. His harness was strapped tight, a short tether clipped to Nathan's belt loop. The dog's ears twitched with every splash, every gust. Nathan trusted Max's senses more than the radio. Despite the command to withdraw, Nathan glanced down at his laminated neighborhood map. Each home had a check mark, except one, number 317. Oak Street, odd. It had no notation. He narrowed his eyes and looked up. Max, he said softly. The dog stopped. They stood now at the mouth of a narrow driveway choked with muddy water and a floating plastic cooler. House 317 sat crouched between 2 larger, more modern houses. It was an old wood-frame building, paint-peeling porch sagging. From a distance, it didn't look any different from the others. Nathan squinted. That's strange. He raised the radio again. Command, this is Delta Team. One property on Oak appears unmarked 317. Map says cleared, but no visible confirmation on site. A pause. Then 317. Hold on. Marked as checked yesterday by Bravo Team. Could be missing paint. You're low on time, Carter. I'll make it quick, Nathan said, and clipped the radio back onto his vest. Max pulled slightly at the tether. Then he stopped, ears suddenly rigid. His tail dropped, body tensed. And then he barked. One sharp, commanding bark, then another and another. 3 in total, loud and urgent, echoing over the water like warning bells. Nathan froze. Max rarely barked unless he was absolutely sure of something. The dog tugged harder now, turning his head back at Nathan, then forward again, focused on house 317. Nathan's breath caught. "What is it, boy?" he muttered. Max let out a low, insistent growl, then barked once more. The wind picked up, sending ripples through the rising water. The old wind chimes hanging from the porch of 317 trembled, but didn't sing. Nathan unclipped Max's tether, slowly stepping toward the porch. "Let's take a look." The door groaned open with a sickening crack as Nathan Carter pushed into the house, water trailing from his boots. The air inside 317 Oak Street was warmer than expected, but the kind of warmth that clung to mold and rot. The smell hit him first, a cloying mixture of wet wood mildew and something faintly sweet like old food left to decay. His flashlight beam swept the hallway, catching waterlogged picture frames and swollen drywall. On a warped end table floated a soaked birthday card with the edges curling in on themselves. Max, the 4-year-old German shepherd at his side, moved ahead carefully, nose down ears, perked. His black and tan coat dripped steadily, his step slow and silent. The harness on his back was slick with rain, the orange reflective strips barely visible in the dim interior. Max had gone rigid the moment they crossed the threshold. Search and rescue. Nathan called, voice low but firm. "Is anyone here?" Silence. Only the soft gurgle of water pressing against the walls and the occasional groan from the ceiling joists above. Nathan swept the light into the living room, couch cushions overturned and half submerged, a bookshelf. Collapsed books, floating like bloated bodies. But Max didn't veer. He moved forward with intention, heading toward the back of the house. They passed a family photo fallen to the floor. The image was faded and cracked, a man, a woman, and a girl. The girl looked about 6. Chestnut hair, bright eyes, the kind of smile that only existed before life taught you fear. Max gave a soft whine, then turned sharply into what must have been the kitchen. Nathan followed. The kitchen was worse. Cabinet doors were ajar, hanging crooked like teeth knocked loose. A pot lay sideways in the sink, crusted with remnants of what may have once been soup. The refrigerator was open and dark, its contents drifting in the few inches of brown water pooling on the floor. Then Max stopped. He didn't bark. He rarely did inside a structure, but his body language said it all. Front paws planted, head-tilted nose toward a lower cabinet beneath the sink. He let out a low, almost pleading whine. Nathan moved forward, crouched and slowly opened the cabinet. The wood creaked against water-swollen hinges. Inside, curled up tightly, was a little girl. She wore a red sweater soaked dark with mud, her knees pulled into her chest arms, locked around a limp cloth doll. Her chestnut hair clung to her cheeks in wet strands. Her lips were pale, the edges tinged bluish. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. But her eyes, wide, unblinking, locked on Nathan's, as if trying to remember what another human being looked like. Nathan's breath caught. He pulled off his rescue jacket, the inside still dry. With the careful precision of someone handling something far too fragile, he wrapped the jacket around her and lifted her out. She was ice cold, but pliant, and far too light. Max moved in, close sniffed gently at her hand. She didn't react, but didn't recoil either. Nathan adjusted his grip and held her close. "I've got you now," he whispered. "You're okay." He turned toward the door. Max closed behind the wind outside, now howling louder than before. Rain lashed against the windows as if trying to get in. As they stepped onto the porch, the force of the storm nearly shoved Nathan backward. The girl's small frame fit against his chest like a shadow. He took 2 steps into the floodwaters that now reached just below his knees. Then Max growled. A split second later, he barked sharp, panicked twice in a row. Nathan turned his head instinctively. A thunderous metallic groan echoed from the street. In the distance, a massive billboard, one of those old roadside advertisements bolted to rusted poles, had broken free. The wind caught it like a sail, twisting it in midair as it came hurtling across the flood. Time stretched and then snapped. Nathan had a half-second to react. He spun, body shielding the girl, lowering himself slightly. Max lunged to the side, barking again louder this time. On the rooftop across from them, a man stood in a yellow poncho, clutching his smartphone. He had short salt and pepper hair, a lean build, and the shaky posture of someone unused to chaos. His name was Harold Monroe, a retired high school chemistry teacher who had refused to evacuate because his wife's ashes were still inside the house behind him. He had a habit of documenting everything, storms, birds, traffic lights that flickered weirdly. So, when he saw the soldier, the dog, and the little girl walking out into the flood just as the billboard came flying through the air, he did what he always did. He hit record. He never expected what he filmed would go viral. The rain had finally stopped. For the first time in days, the skies above Bright Ridge held a watery light, filtered through thin clouds like the eye of a tired god. The town still drowned in places, cars marooned on front lawns, windows boarded and marked with blue spray paint fences half swallowed by brown tidewater, but the worst had passed. For now. Inside the Bright Ridge Elementary School, converted into an evacuation and medical center, a long hallway smelled of antiseptic and wet clothing. In a small medical bay off the west wing, behind a plastic curtain, Emily Dawn sat wrapped in a gray blanket on a cot too large for her. The fabric sagged around her like a nest. Her red sweater had been replaced by a donated cotton shirt, slightly too big. The sleeves rolled awkwardly to her elbows. Her soaked doll, washed and dried, rested beside her, with its missing button eye stitched loosely back in place. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She sat quietly, eyes glassy occasionally, tapping her fingertips 3 soft beats against her knee or the edge of the cot. Tap, 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 always 3, never more. She hadn't said a word since arriving, not until Nurse Camilla Ortega, a gentle-voiced woman in her early 40s with thick black curls pulled into a bun and dark observant eyes, knelt beside her and softly whispered, "Is there anything you want to tell me, sweetheart?" The girl didn't speak right away, but after a long pause she leaned slightly forward and whispered in a voice that seemed to come from someplace too old for 6 years of life. Mom said, "Don't follow." I listened, so I stayed. Camilla blinked, startled, but nodded. "You were very brave," she murmured. Down the hall, Sergeant Nathan Carter leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, arms crossed still in partial uniform, his jacket gone, pants and boots drying slowly under a ceiling fan. His dark brown hair clung to his forehead in damp waves. Beside him, Max lay on the linoleum floor, head resting on his front paws. The dog's eyes remained open ears, flicking toward every hallway footstep. Nathan had said little since the rescue. He had submitted the incident report, given his account to the coordinator, and then stayed something no one expected or asked of him. But he hadn't left. Not even to sleep. Nathan, Camilla said, as she stepped out of the curtain-draped bay. She spoke. He looked up sharply. "What did she say?" The nurse hesitated. She said her mom told her not to follow, so she stayed. Nathan's jaw tightened. He nodded once, said nothing. 3 days passed. Emily remained at the shelter, eating little, sleeping in, Fitz always clutching the doll. Volunteers tried to engage her with storybooks, puzzles, simple games. But she kept to herself. Only Max, when allowed near, seemed to offer her some kind of calm, his presence like a silent anchor in a drifting world. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a dark blue SUV pulled into the school parking lot. It bore no visible signs of urgency. From the passenger side stepped a man in his late 30s, tall with short sandy blonde hair, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and jeans too clean for flood conditions. His movements were stiff, anxious. He looked around quickly as if unsure of where to go. On the driver's side, a woman emerged, slender, early 30s, with highlighted hair tied in a high ponytail, sunglasses that covered half her face, and a cream leather handbag slung over one shoulder. She checked her phone before even closing the car door. Ryan and Melissa Dawn had arrived. At the front desk, they gave their names. A volunteer led them down the hall. Nathan saw them before they saw him. His eyes narrowed. Max lifted his head. The couple stopped outside the bay, and Melissa finally took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry. Emily, Ryan called, softly, voice cracking. The little girl looked up from her cot. She didn't run to them. She didn't smile. She sat still for a long moment. Then slowly she rose, walked 3 quiet steps to her father. He bent, slightly unsure whether to kneel, hug, or pick her up. Before he could decide, Emily lifted her hand and tapped his shoulder. Once, twice, 3 times, tap, tap, tap. Then she stepped back. Ryan froze. "Emmy," he said. Melissa crouched and reached for her daughter, lips pulled into a practiced smile. "Mommy missed you, baby." Emily didn't respond. Nathan stepped forward. Where were you? The last 3 days. Ryan looked up, clearly startled. Who are you, rescue unit? I found your daughter. Melissa stood slowly. We were trapped on the highway. We couldn't get a signal. Traffic was insane. Nathan tilted his head. 3 days. It was complicated, Ryan said, his voice sharper now. Nathan didn't reply. He just looked at Emily, who had retreated to her cot. She tapped the edge again 3 times. After a short conversation with the coordinator, the couple was allowed to take Emily home under temporary supervision. As they walked down the hallway, Emily looked over her shoulder once toward Nathan and Max. She didn't smile, but she nodded. Max stood up, tail wagging faintly. Nathan didn't return the nod. He watched them go in silence. The rain had passed, but its echo still lived in the muddy streets and shattered routines of Bright Ridge. Outside, the town's temporary emergency operations center, once a public library now swarming with laptops, generators, and half-eaten protein bars. Sergeant Nathan Carter sat at a folding table, his brows furrowed beneath the glow of a flickering desk lamp. The map before him was laminated, creased at the corners, and smeared faintly with dried rain. It was the master flood zone dispatch schematic, color-coded for priority zones, dotted with hazard markers and relief stations. A red marker traced the major water paths. Yellow zones were high-risk residential clusters. Green zones were those already cleared. Nathan scanned the map again. Oak Street, where he and Max had found Emily, was nowhere on the priority list. Worse, the digital copy he had initially reviewed showed Oak Street inside a yellow zone. Now, on this printed version, it was cleanly in the green. Cleared. Safe. Forgotten. He tapped the spot with a pen, frowning. That house should never have been marked safe. Behind him, Captain Lorraine Keeley, a no-nonsense African-American woman in her late 40s with cropped gray-black hair and an authoritative stance, approached with a clipboard. She had always been by the book, but fair, her voice carrying weight even when whispered. Still digging through the logs, Carter? She asked. He nodded. The kid Emily Dawn? Her house wasn't supposed to be greenlit. Someone changed the zoning. Keeley leaned over the map, expression tightening. You sure I pulled the satellite drafts from 5 days ago? It was yellow then. Now it's green in every copy after that date. I'm filing an incident report. Keeley pursed her lips. It'll get buried unless you've got something concrete, and we've got a town to put back together. Nathan didn't reply. Instead, he opened his weathered laptop and clicked through folders until he found the file he'd renamed quietly the night before. Incident 317, Dawn Residence. He uploaded the map discrepancy, a scanned copy of Emily's intake form, and a short note, possible child endangerment. Priority zoning may have been falsified. Then he hit submit. But when he returned an hour later to check on the submission, status closed. No action required. Max, who had been napping beneath the table, stirred slightly, letting out a low grunt. The dog's normally alert posture was slouched. His ears, always attentive, drooped. Nathan noticed immediately. You okay, buddy? Max didn't answer, of course, but his tail gave a faint wag. That evening, after their shift rotation ended, Nathan brought Max to the veterinary tent on the edge of the compound. Dr. Clara Bennett, a petite woman in her early 30s with chestnut curls, freckled skin, and a warm but focused demeanor, checked Max thoroughly. Age and exhaustion. She concluded, giving the dog's paw a soft pat. He's what for? Yeah, strong as a tank, but he's been running nonstop. Well, even tanks need a tune-up. Let him rest a few days. He's fine, just depleted. Nathan nodded and stayed for a moment longer, watching Max breathe steadily on a fleece mat. The tent smelled of antiseptic and wet fur, the quiet only broken by the low hum of generators. As he stepped back into the night, a sharp gust pulled at the collar of his jacket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded intake form for Emily Dawn. The signature at the bottom, Ryan M. Dawn, was clean, confident, and oddly familiar. Something tickled in the back of his mind. Dawn. He opened his phone and began searching. It didn't take long. Dawn Relief Supplies. A regional logistics contractor. Awarded 3 major supply contracts for Bright Ridge's disaster relief. All approved under expedited orders thanks to a municipal emergency clause signed by Mayor Evelyn Brooks. Nathan scrolled further. The company's CEO photo stared back at him. Ryan M. Dawn, now dressed in a tailored navy suit, smiling beneath the company banner. The same man who had walked into the shelter 3 days ago, claiming he couldn't find his daughter for 72 hours because of traffic. Nathan's pulse slowed. He leaned back on the bench, hands folded together, eyes narrowed. There was no traffic that lasted 3 days, not with his kind of clearance. He pulled up the city's public records database. Evelyn Brooks had been mayor of Bright Ridge for nearly 6 years, a woman of charm and well-rehearsed compassion. 56 with immaculately styled hair, always seen in clean suits and perfectly timed photo ops. She had spoken on every press conference since the flooding began, using phrases like unshakable resilience and a city of neighbors. Nathan watched one clip again this time, focusing not on what she said, but who stood behind her. A faint frame of a man in a gray suit, arms crossed, head slightly lowered. Ryan Dawn, front row at her side. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't a coincidence. Nathan grabbed his notebook and jotted down 3 names: Emily, Ryan, Evelyn, then below it one more, Max, off duty, 3 days rest. His eyes fell on the last name. Max had been his partner through mudslides, hurricanes, and apartment fires, but now for the first time Nathan felt the weight of being alone. He looked up at the map again, the laminated creases catching the light. Somewhere in those lines was a story someone didn't want told. And Nathan Carter wasn't done asking. The next morning in Bright Ridge was heavy with fog, the kind that clung to windows and dampened even the sharpest sirens. Nathan Carter walked along the gravel path, leading to the back entrance of the Bright Ridge Sentinel, a modest 2-story brick building that had survived 3 renovations and 1 fire. A green press sticker fluttered on the glass door. Inside, past filing cabinets and a mess of stacked newspapers, he found her Sarah Hayes, the town's only real investigative journalist. Sarah was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with narrow shoulders and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her dark auburn hair was always tied back in a low, unbothered ponytail, and her standard attire was a faded army jacket over a black turtleneck, paired with worn jeans and boots that had seen more protests than parties. Sarah had a reputation fearless, with a pen mistrustful of authority, and known for being a little too quiet before asking a question that made people sweat. Her articles had exposed fraudulent developers, a corrupt school board president, and a misused hurricane relief fund 5 years earlier. People either admired her or avoided her, often both. "Carter," she said without turning from her screen. "You look like someone who hasn't slept." "I haven't," he replied. "You still chasing smoke?" "I chase fire," she said finally, glancing up. "What do you have?" Nathan handed her a flash drive. Map zoning discrepancies, names, contracts, Mayor Evelyn, Ryan Dawn, and Emily. "The girl we pulled from Oak Street." She said something strange. Sarah inserted the drive and began scanning the folders. Strange how she repeated a sentence like it was memorized. Said, "Nobody cared about that old house. We saved a ton." Just like that. Sarah's eyes narrowed. That's not something a 6-year-old comes up with on her own. "No," Nathan said, "but it's something she could have overheard." They moved into her tiny back office wallpapered with articles and photos of Bright Ridge through decades of floods, fires, and ribbon cuttings. A coffee pot in the corner burbled beside an old microwave. "I've been following the Dawn contracts for weeks," Sarah said, opening another folder. "They came out of nowhere, 3 contracts in 1 month. All pre-approved under emergency clause waivers signed by Mayor Brooks." Nathan leaned against the wall. "That's too fast, especially for a town this size. Which is why I requested internal city memos last week," she said. "I got a reply from someone who wants to talk. Lisa." Sarah pulled out a yellow sticky note with a scribbled address and name. "She works at city planning, claims she has audio from one of the closed-door meetings between Brooks and Ryan Dawn. She said, and I quote, 'This whole town's about to drown in lies.'" Nathan stood straight. "Let's go." Lisa lived in a small townhouse in the northern part of town, where floodwaters had barely licked the sidewalk. She was in her late 20s, petite, pale, with nervous green eyes behind round glasses. Her dirty blonde hair was tied into a bun, and she wore a simple gray sweater, sleeves pulled down to her fists. "I'm not supposed to talk to anyone," Lisa whispered, ushering them into the cramped living room. "But I couldn't sleep. I heard what happened to the girl. And they don't care, you know." They said it outright. She handed Sarah a small flash recorder and pressed play. Nathan and Sarah leaned in, a man's voice confident, smooth, undeniably Ryan Dawn. The fewer addresses on that list, the bigger the margin. These outer sectors, they barely bring in tax revenue. No one's going to miss a few abandoned homes. Then the mayor's voice firm calculated, just make sure the documents show those zones as safe. We'll push through the orders. No one's going to double check once the headlines calm down. Silence. Nathan sat back, anger pooling behind his eyes. They left people out, on purpose, to save money. Lisa nodded. They called it streamlining. I call it murder by paperwork. Sarah copied the file to her laptop and backed it up to the cloud immediately. I'll write it, but I need more. I need faces, testimonies, victims. Nathan exhaled. Emily's not ready, but I'll find others. As they left Lisa's house, Sarah paused at the sidewalk. You know this is going to blow a hole in City Hall, good Nathan said. They buried a neighborhood. Now, let's dig it up. The morning the story aired, Bright Ridge felt like it had cracked in half. The headline blared across every screen and newspaper, in town, dark corner, when flood maps lie. Sarah Hayes' voice narrated over drone footage of the neglected Oak Street district shots of warped floorboards and drowned staircases, the trembling voice of Lisa recounting her secret recordings, and an overlay of Emily's eerie sentence. Nobody cared about that old house. We saved a ton. By noon, every cafe, gas station, and waiting room was tuned in. City Hall closed its doors. The mayor's office issued a vague press statement. But it was already too late. Sarah sat at her usual spot in the newsroom, exhausted, her fingers trembling over her keyboard as she drafted the follow-up. Her inbox overflowed with tips, threats, and support. She had faced backlash before, but never this fast, never this loud. The only thing louder than the public's outrage was the silence from those in power. Meanwhile, Nathan Carter stood alone in the gear shed behind the emergency command post. He was packing up Max's harness, folded maps, and his badge. He hadn't even been called in, just a sealed envelope slid under his door that morning. Effective, immediately you are reassigned to Western Sector 12. Report within 48 hours. No thank you, no explanation. He knew what it meant. Max, now slightly recovered, but still limping, rested on his side nearby. The 4-year-old German shepherd had regained some of his strength, but not his full stamina. His amber eyes followed Nathan's every movement, ears twitching at the sounds of approaching voices. A gentle knock at the open shed door startled both of them. It was Sarah. They pulled you, she said flatly. Yeah. She stepped inside. Her hair was a mess from the wind, her jacket wet from the drizzle. FBI called me this morning. They want the full files. I sent everything, timestamps, maps, audio. I named you as my primary source. Nathan nodded. Good. It needs to burn. And it will, she said. But they're going to try to bury you first. I know. Just then the familiar pitter-patter of small shoes echoed in the gravel. Emily Dawn appeared at the doorway, escorted by an older nurse. The 6-year-old girl had grown slightly fuller in the face since her rescue, but still carried that quiet intensity behind her light brown eyes. Her strawberry blonde hair was neatly tied in 2 braids today. She wore a soft blue hoodie, 2 sizes too big sleeves bunching at the wrists. She stepped in slowly, not saying a word. Max lifted his head. Emily walked straight toward him and knelt. She didn't pet him right away. She simply looked at him. After a long pause, she placed both hands gently on his face, rested her forehead to his, and whispered, I'm not scared anymore. Because you and your friend will come back. Nathan's breath caught. He bent down beside her. I promise we will, he said. Emily then did something she hadn't done in front of anyone. She hugged Max tightly, the way only a child can. Sarah turned away briefly, blinking fast. Outside the shed, distant shouts rang through the storm-muted air. Protesters had gathered in front of City Hall. Handmade signs waved in defiance. We pay taxes to save lives, not to make profits. No child is disposable. At the front of the crowd stood a woman with silver blonde hair and a police-issued raincoat. Captain Lorraine Keeley. The 48-year-old white American woman had been a silent ally throughout the crisis, even when she couldn't publicly speak up. She stood stone-faced, arms crossed, letting the storm of truth rain down. Back in the newsroom, Sarah received a call from a blocked number. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She answered. The voice on the other end was distorted. You think this is about one kid, the caller said. That little girl wasn't on the list because she wasn't worth anything. No property taxes, no donations, no votes. "Who is this?" Sarah snapped. But the line went dead. She stared at the phone, her jaw clenched. Outside police sirens cut through the cold wind, not chasing criminals, but watching their own citizens march. Nathan returned to the central station for his last sign-off. The desk officer didn't make eye contact. His name was already off the roster, but none of that mattered anymore. The damage was done. And the silence, it was finally screaming. The air was heavy that morning, not with rain, but with the kind of quiet that lingers before something final. Bright Ridge's sky had lost its storms, replaced by pale sunlight filtering through thin, broken clouds. The town courthouse, an old red brick building with ivy curling around its columns, stood like a tired sentinel in the center of the square, bearing witness to what many hoped would be the first step toward healing. Inside courtroom B, every seat was taken. Locals, journalists, and silent watchers filled the pews. On the front row sat Sarah Hayes, her auburn hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail, gray eyes sharp, yet tired behind thin-framed glasses. Dressed in a dark blazer and worn jeans, she took notes by hand, her knuckles white around the pen. Beside her was Nathan Carter, recently returned to Bright Ridge on temporary leave. He wore a clean uniform, though unofficially more in solidarity than duty. His jaw remained tight throughout the proceedings. At the prosecution table, the assistant U.S. attorney, Grace Whitmore, a composed black woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and precise movements, stood to deliver the final summary. Her voice didn't rise in anger. It didn't need to. Every word she spoke landed like a stone. "Evelyn Brooks, as mayor, you knowingly approved the redaction of populated districts from the emergency response map, endangering civilian lives for the financial benefit of your political donors, including Ryan Dawn." A few heads turned to the defense table. Evelyn Brooks, 58 years old, once commanding and immaculately dressed, now sat slouched. Her platinum blonde bob was disheveled, her expression hollow. Her pearl earrings were gone. So was her posture. Beside her, Ryan Dawn looked equally diminished. The 45-year-old man, once the polished face of Dawn Relief Supplies, now wore a rumpled gray suit and handcuffs. His eyes darted between his lawyers and the judge, sweat forming at his temples, despite the cool courtroom air. In the back row, Melissa Dawn sat alone. Emily's mother, around 40, with pale skin and sunken features, wore a plain beige dress and stared into her lap. She never looked up. The judge, a heavy-set man in his 60s with stern eyebrows and a gavel worn smooth by years of use, read each verdict aloud. For Evelyn Brooks, 12 years in federal prison. A soft gasp swept through the room. For Ryan Dawn, 15 years in federal prison and full asset forfeiture. Ryan closed his eyes. No words. For Melissa, Dawn, 5 years suspended sentence with probation, conditional upon psychological counseling, and surrender of all parental rights. A stillness followed. Not silence, just the kind of deep collective breath that a town takes when the weight of injustice begins to lift. Later that afternoon, the local news aired images of Emily Dawn being led gently into her new home. The house sat on a quiet hill overlooking the South Valley, modest but warm, with a white fence and a garden filled with sunflowers. Her new guardians were Thomas and Ruth Gallagher, both retired middle school teachers in their late 60s. Thomas, a tall man with soft eyes behind thick glasses, once taught geography. Ruth, with short curly gray hair and a voice like soft wool, had spent 30 years teaching literature and art. They never had children of their own, but the moment they saw Emily's picture, they knew. Emily, now dressed in a light lavender dress and a blue cardigan, didn't cry when she arrived. She simply looked around the living room, then at Max, whom Nathan had brought for the visit, and said softly, "It's quiet here." Nathan nodded. "It's safe here, too." Max, still recovering, but wagging his tail, leaned into her leg as she sat down. The 4-year-old German shepherd, with his signature black and tan coat and worn eyes, still seemed to sense her mood better than any adult. Days passed. Emily began to sleep through the night. No more sudden cries, no repeated whispers. She ate full meals painted during the day and once again smiled, though rarely with teeth. Her favorite place was the art corner Ruth set up in the back room, where the sunlight streamed in around 3 p.m. One afternoon, she presented them with a painting. In it was Max standing on a patch of green grass beneath a brilliant blue sky. Behind him were rooftops and trees all painted in calming pastels. On one side of the canvas in bold crayon strokes she had written, "The Safe Place." Thomas quietly framed the painting. A week later, it hung in the children's section of the Bright Ridge Public Library next to a small brass plaque that read, "In honor of all who choose to hear the silent." When Sarah passed by the library and saw it, she stood still for a long time. Her expression softened, not just from pride, but something deeper, a reminder that even when justice is won, restoration takes time. Back at the Gallagher home, Ruth sat with Emily on the porch swing. "Why did you paint Max in the green place?" she asked. Emily looked up, her strawberry blonde hair tousled in the breeze. "Because green means rescue," she said. "That's where he found me." The sun had finally returned to Bright Ridge, not just to its skies, but to its spirit. It poured gently across the rooftops and into the once silent town square, where laughter could now be heard rising above the rustle of new leaves and the hum of rebuilding. On the edge of town, nestled on a gently sloping hill above the riverbank, stood the newly built Ridge Resilient Center, a place that had once been only a line on a grant proposal and a whispered dream. Now it stood proudly, its wooden walls painted in earthy greens and bright whites with the word "Hope" carved above the door. Nathan Carter, now wearing a faded navy t-shirt with the center's logo and cargo pants with deep pockets always filled with bandages, whistles, and dog treats, stood at the edge of the training field. At 38, Nathan had grown more weathered, but in a way that seemed carved from purpose rather than wear. His once grim demeanor had softened, not dulled, but made warmer, more approachable. In his eyes was still the storm, but now it had passed. Now there was space for light. Beside him, Max, now 5 years old, trotted confidently with a red service vest strapped across his muscular body. His black and tan fur gleamed in the sun, and though the scar on his hind leg remained, it was less a wound and more a badge. Max had earned it. He was no longer just a rescue dog, he was a teacher. He led a group of kids through obstacle drills, showing them how to crawl under tables, bark for help, or stay still in rising waters. Among the children was Emily. Now, 7, she had gained a bit of height, but still wore her hair in the same loose strawberry blonde braid. Her cheeks had color now, and her laughter came freely even while her feet kicked up dust in the training yard. She wore a handmade paper crown and a sash that read, "Flood Hero" in crayon. In her hand fluttered a small flag made from an old coloring book page. She waved it like a general leading troops into kindness. The center had grown fast-funded in part by a string of donations, following the airing of Sarah Hayes' documentary series, Dark Corners No More. Sarah herself visited often dressed in the same olive field jacket and jeans, her auburn hair now showing a few stubborn streaks of silver. She had become something of a local legend, a woman whose sharp gray eyes had once searched for corruption, now softened in the presence of children, often kneeling to show them how to record their own stories, using handheld cameras and journals. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was carefully folded and marked with purple ink in a child's script. Nathan opened it while sitting on the center's porch, Max's head resting beside his foot. Inside were a few words and a drawing. "I drew our old house again. But this time, I painted it green, because I think it deserves to be saved, just like me. Emily." The drawing was crayon and watercolor, messy and full of life. It showed the little house on Oak Street no longer gray and crumbling, but full of vines and blossoms with birds on the roof, and Max in the yard. Nathan held the paper a long time. He didn't speak, just stroked Max's fur slowly. The wind rustling nearby, wind chimes that Sarah had hung on the porch. Later that evening, Thomas and Ruth Gallagher, the retired school teachers who had adopted Emily, arrived for a parent workshop. Thomas was tall and lean, with round spectacles, and an endless pocket of dad jokes. Ruth was shorter, her silver curls always tucked into a sun hat, eyes twinkling with quiet authority. They greeted Nathan with warm handshakes and brought fresh lemonade for the kids. As the sun began to lower, casting the whole field in amber, Nathan gathered everyone for the final circle of the day. Children sat cross-legged, their faces flushed and smiling. Sarah stood at the edge recording the moment. Nathan looked at them, all these children who had seen too much but had learned even more. "You know," he began, voice calm and gravelly, "sometimes what saves us isn't the loudest shout. Sometimes it's just a bark, or a whisper, or someone turning around instead of walking away." He glanced down at Max, who wagged his tail once and then settled beside him. Emily raised her hand. "Like you and Max did for me." He nodded, exactly like that. As laughter and chatter resumed, Emily sprinted toward Max and threw her arms around his neck. The dog let out a low woof and licked her cheek, making her giggle uncontrollably. The sky above Bright Ridge was no longer heavy. It was open, painted in soft gold and blue. And there beneath it, on that small patch of land, with children's drawings hanging from every fence post, it became clear no place, no person, no soul should ever be left behind. Sometimes God speaks through the silence, not with thunder, but with a bark in the rain. This is a story of how a loyal dog, a broken soldier, and a forgotten child were brought together not by chance, but by purpose. When no one else saw, he did. When no one else came, he sent Max. In the messiness of life and the floods we each face, there are still miracles. But often they don't come in shining lights. They come in muddy paw prints, in a child's whisper, in a second chance. So, if this story touched you, if you believe that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard, do one thing: share this video. Leave a comment below saying, "Amen," if you believe God still works through the ones we least expect. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we tell stories that might just be the sign you've been praying for. May God bless you and protect the silent ones, human or not, who are still waiting to be found.